Lance, you're back.
He's back.
And you got a beard.
I did come back with a beard.
Yeah, we kind of matched it. We both got some grays in there.
I know. My kids were surprised I had so much gray hair on my chin. And Luke, my middle one, was like, yeah, you should keep the beard because when you shave, it makes you look like you're trying to be young, but you're not.
Ooh, that's awesome.
I know.
That is great.
I was like, shut up, Luke.
It's crazy about how our kids humble us
That
with.
is
Oh, I know,
so
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Like, I was just shaving. I didn't even know that's
Right.
what I was trying to do.
I have always shaved,
Yeah.
and then I stopped this summer. So
Yeah, so just a quick fun thing
Oh,
that
fun?
you got to do.
Yeah,
I know you had highs and lows.
highs and lows.
Let's do the right Christian thing and only talk about the positives.
Oh man, well that's not going to
Just
fit
kidding.
with what we're going to talk about
I
later.
know.
No, we got to spend so much time together as a family. That
That's
was
good.
the greatest benefit of the whole summer. My son Spencer and I went to Yosemite, so definitely a high. And then the five of us,
Yeah.
we're just together all the time. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned right quick because you the Bible Project. You got to go hang out there for a little bit. Tell us about that.
I went to Portland for school at the end of the summer. Had to go for a class with Tanner and Kyle, and then Daniel Swafford tagged along, and we got to tour Bible Project, which I listened to their podcast all the time. It was just so cool to be there, like in the space where all these things are created, the audio, the video, the classroom stuff. It was
all
great.
of it.
All of
Yeah.
it.
It's a
So
cool.
good.
It's a cool vibe. Their space. Their
Oh,
office.
for sure.
studio
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, it was, I want to bring our staff there and be like, this is what an office should be.
Yeah.
It was super cool.
Although our office is pretty cool. It's
Our
a big
office-
house with a long hallway.
It is very cool. There are some things we could.
Your office, I especially like. I stole
know,
all
yeah,
summer.
all summer long.
Yeah.
When we were talking the other day, and you were like, "Yeah, I was in your office all summer long," and Sherry said, "That's where you've been."
Yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. You know, as someone was saying the other day about one of the awkward things about our office is it's such a long hallway. It's like how many times it takes to pass someone before.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
you feel like you start running?
Well, no, or I'm not saying hi to you anymore. It's just awkward. Like you've already
Right.
been like, "Hey, what's up? Good to see you. Hey, man, what's going on? Hey," and then like you just pass
11
in silence.
times later,
'cause
yeah.
it's so
It's
much.
a long hallway.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hop in today. Lance, it's good to have you back. It
Yeah,
has
we're
been
so glad
cool.
you're back. We missed you.
Yeah, I don't want to discount because in case some of them are listening who were on the podcast this summer, it was great.
No,
having
they
the
were
variety.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
It
you
was-
guys
it
had
was
some really good
very,
ones.
very
I had a
fun.
bunch of my friends on this summer.
Yeah,
did.
absolutely.
Yeah.
it was awesome. But I'm glad to have
We
the gang
love
back.
Lance and everyone else.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I know. Okay, so we're picking up in Matthew last week. We kind of started into the Sermon on the Mount, and I don't know, it wasn't like halfway through. Where does 6 pick up in that? Is there like a change there?
I would say
or-
about halfway through is close.
Yeah,
We have a
the
couple-
Sermon on the Mount. Sorry.
It's 5 through 7.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's a turn in the type of content. I think from 5 to 6.
Yeah. All right, well, how so? Like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, so chapter 5 is a lot of things about like your anger or your lust or the way you view money. Although he does pick that back up in 6, but I don't know. It's almost like when I read it, just really hard things to digest and to take in.
Yeah.
And he's also, we sort of talked a little bit about how this is a retelling in a new way, in a fulfilled way of the Exodus story in the Old Testament. And so we said, he sits on this mountain and he's giving the law. He's teaching with authority on the law. And what he was doing a lot of 5 was say, these are the people who are invited into the kingdom, the marginalized. And then he says, you have heard that this is what the law says, but this, I'm going to actually explain to you what it means. And so that first section was really him talking about the Torah.
Yeah.
Explaining what the kingdom looks like and related to the Torah. And then now he's moving into religious practices, I think.
Yeah.
So I think this section for me felt like super dense. Like each, even paragraph in every chapter just felt like, whoa, there's a lot here. I feel like I'm missing a lot. So I want to try and honor the time, trying to keep it speedy. So if there's stuff I'm either skipping over, just mention it. But in 6, this idea that there's these repetitive phrases in there about in secret, that things being done in secret, people who see in secret, and then a father who is in secret, he sees in secret, and then it repeats that even again later down the fact, a father who is in secret, a father who sees in secret. I don't know, that just seemed weird. Some things that are repetitive, and it just got me thinking what is that all about?
Because it's important, because
Yeah.
it's being repeated, yeah.
I love this.
What?
Just like the the way you pick up on
Mm-hmm.
that.
So, I mean, do you have any perspective or insight? Because I didn't do any like sub research to go a little bit
Well,
deeper into that. But
I think that even if you sort of, because we just got through 5, and in 5 he says, 5:16 he says, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works.
yeah,
So he has that in 5, and then in 6 he keeps saying, hey, when you're doing these good things, do it in secret.
yeah,
So your Father sees and rewards you. So what does that mean? Are we supposed to be doing it before everyone or doing it in secret? And I think the idea throughout all the Sermon on the Mount is your heart.
Yeah.
Right? He's speaking to a renewed heart, a change in your heart. And so the difference is in 5, he says, so that they will give glory to your Father who's in heaven. And then in 6, and all throughout 6, like you're talking about, he keeps saying, don't do it so others see you so that you have their praise.
yeah,
So it's this difference between, are you doing things just so people will think you are a good person? Are you doing things because you're really trying to glorify your Father? You're really trying to serve other people. It's all about the heart. And he's saying secret, not because it needs to be a secret, but this is really who you are all the time.
Yeah.
And you're doing it for your Father, not for yourself.
yeah. I kind of started going with like, as I read a little bit, like, okay, this is almost speaking to like this humble spirit. It's like I should be doing these things, like you said, internally, not for external reward. And then immediately it goes into, after he says some of those lines, it starts talking about the laying up treasures in heaven. And I was like, is that kind of like you do these things in secret, like these rewards that you're, because the things of this earth, moth, they destroy, but it said, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven is like, how the process of laying up treasures in heaven is a little bit about what he was just talking about before. It's like, you're doing these things that's bringing honor and glory to God, and I don't know. You like shaking your head like
Yeah,
No,
I'm waiting for
yeah.
this.
you got to remember I'm making stuff up here a little bit. So part of it is you guys got to help self-correct. You're like,
No, you're doing
"Hey,
great."
almost there, almost.
I also have in mind when I read this that there are different people in the audience listening to the teachings of Jesus. And so there are people who are hearing the things being said in chapter 5, and they're feeling like, wow, that's really hard. But also people that are hearing that are nodding their heads and they're saying, heck yes, Jesus. Those are probably the religious people. Like, you tell those folks. But then he turns and he's going to talk to the other people who are outwardly doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing, but there's a heart issue behind it. And so
All the religious folks.
all the religious people. He's like,
Yeah.
don't listen, when you pray, don't just make it something you do in front of others or that makes you look good. You need to do these things in secret, and it needs to be about your heart, like you're saying. So it's not that this isn't all applicable to each of us, but it is also, I think he is targeting different people when he speaks these things.
And just to I think we said last time, he says, I'm here to fulfill the law and the prophets. And then later on, he'll say the law and the prophets is about loving God and loving your neighbor. And this whole section is about that. It's relationally about how we love God with everything that we are and how we love other people.
Yeah.
And every section really goes back to that concept.
Since you brought that up, I feel like we have to jump to 7, the golden rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, he's here to fulfill the law and the prophets. And then he says in verse 12 of chapter 7, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. I mean, I don't know what that does in your mind, but it rattles things around. He's here to fulfill it, and then he calls us to understand the law and the prophets that way.
And to live that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's so much in these chapters that we're going through. It is dense, like you said. Every paragraph you could spend a long time on and say, what does that mean for me? How do I actually live this out? What does it mean to not judge, but to also live a holy life? I mean, that is what we always have to go back to. Treat others how you'd want to be treated. Whenever you are in sin or making mistakes, because we all are, that's the most important part, how would you want someone else to treat you, to confront you, to talk to you? How do we do that as a family of believers? And it's doing others how you'd want them to treat you. Love God, love others. I mean, you can just sort of keep that in the back of your head all the time.
And when you do that, you're living out God's call on his people Israel. all the story of the Old Testament.
Yes.
What he wants for his people and the difference he wants them to make in the world.
And I would say one other thing in 6 and 7, I think, is just this invitation to come to God, because it's how we treat other people, and it is this relationship that we're invited into in Jesus to the Father. So he says, ask the Father, and he will respond to you. He's a good Father. He teaches us how to pray every day. He's assuming that we are going to pray. He's inviting us to pray and to think of God as a good Father. I mean, I think that can be really hard for people.
Yeah.
But Jesus is telling us here to do that.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think why it felt dense is because coming out of the Sermon on the Mount, all the blessed are, it's still he's painting this picture of what the kingdom looks like and what it looks like to be a citizen of that kingdom. And I think in all these things, there's some like, well, what does that practically mean for me to live as a Christian? And I think these are kind of like he's painting a picture of what that can look like. And so a lot of these things, while not directly transferable, one-to-one, but they're either ideas or concepts. It's like, yeah, this is what it looks like to embrace this either new ethic or embrace this idea that's counter to what even still today it's still different, a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's loving others, it's glory to God. It's radical trust in the Father too. I think we've already seen that in Jesus, and I think that's also what he's calling us to, is to live in the kingdom is to trust God with your finances, with your anxieties, with your prayers, even in the midst of really hard circumstances, like he talks about in the Beatitudes. It's just trust that he's a good Father.
Yeah. All right, let's skip on to 8. So he's finally come off the mountain, and then he starts like healing folks and doing some cool stuff.
He says at the end of 8, at the end of 7, he's basically says, make a choice.
Yeah.
So he says all this stuff, and then he says, you got to make a choice, and it matters.
Yeah.
I think we should just mention that.
Yeah, go into that, closing out the Sermon on the Mount with the whole build your house on the rock. Something that I learned from a study Bible years ago in just one of the notes, and I saw it said something that intrigued me and it piqued my interest, so then I read a little more on it. I was taught in children's church growing up, in the church I was part of. They show videos of like build up on the mountaintop, not down on the beach. And so that's just what the category I always had for build on the rock, not on the sand. But in this region, it was kind of a sandy topsoil in most of the area. And in the hot summer months, it would get hard and compact and feel firm. But when the monsoon season came, when it would rain a lot,
away.
that would then become really soft. And so if you built in that season of dryness, you seem like this is sturdy ground to build on. But then later in the year, your house is not sturdy because the rains have come. It's not that there's a different place. It's a matter of Jesus saying, you have to make the choice to do something the right way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change the meaning a whole bunch when you understand the context of where he's talking about, but it does nuance it in a way that's helpful for, at least in my mind. Like there is something for me to do and a right way to do it. So there's a right way to live, a right choice to make. And that's what he's called us to. And so he wraps up the whole Sermon on the Mount with that.
Yeah.
Do the hard work.
And it might not always be obvious, the wide gate. I mean, you can't just follow the crowd and think that that's going to be the rock and that's going to be the way.
Wait, where was that? Because I had that wasn't in this part. That's later on. That's later on in this chapter, or in this week's reading.
The
narrow and wide gate. We read it. I know I read it this week.
Did read it this week.
Anyway, because I remember being like, man, it definitely is like the many and then the few. Oh, it was up of the golden rule after the golden fruit.
I was like,
yeah.
Oh.
It's because we already skipped it. I was looking ahead. Yeah, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So there is a many and there is a few.
And it is a decision.
Yeah. But what's crazy to me about that is you think like, oh, it's the whole world. Jesus, like everybody's,
Especially where we live.
that's not what this says.
Yeah.
So.
And this pushes against the way we talk about grace. So grace is available to all. It is an invitation to come in, but that doesn't mean your responsibility stops. That you have no responsibility. Rather, it's like when you experience grace, you're then called into this upside down kingdom that we've been talking about all year. But you have stuff to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I would remind people everything we talked about with all of Paul's letters. I mean, that this concept that Jesus is very explicit about is all throughout the outworkings of that in the New Testament.
Yep. Okay, so an 8.
Well, right.
Sorry.
I don't know what your Bible says. Mine says the authority of Jesus
Where?
at the end of
Oh, at
7.
the end, yeah.
Just as the title, which sometimes those are helpful. And I think just because I know we're trying to move through a lot quickly. So we said in the very beginning, this is the Jewish king, and everyone's, is this or is it not? You know, this is an apologetic, remember. This section is really Jesus showing now. So he's taught. This is what the new covenant law looks like. This is what the kingdom looks like. And then this is his authority. So his healing over sickness, over evil spirits, over even the chaotic sea, which I know we've talked about on this podcast before. They really saw that as they weren't sea dwellers, so that was chaos to them.
Yeah.
He has authority over all aspects of life, even the authority to forgive. So this is really this apologetic for he really does have the authority of the Messiah and the King. But we can talk about different parts of it. That's just sort of the overall.
Yeah. That's the theme.
That's one of the themes,
yeah, that you need to have in mind as you read through these.
Yeah, and I think that's evident in like what we start seeing after this authority over like spirit, like
Yeah.
sickness and
Yeah.
possession, and even the faith of the centurion. This idea here where you get a glimpse of like Bruce was talking about how Matthew's kind of written to the Hebrews, so the religious people. It's like, man, here he's basically saying or alluding to, like, dude, he's authority over everyone, not just the insiders, not just the Hebrews. This is for what the kingdom that he has is for
Anyone.
the outsides. Yeah, anyone.
It's a big deal because Matthew doesn't have a ton about it, but Jesus says, it's going to everyone from the east to the west, the whole
Yeah.
world
Yep.
is going to come sit with the Israelites.
Yep.
They're going to be my people
Yeah.
who recognize who I am and have allegiance to me, because this centurion, who is this Roman soldier, he actually says, I am too a man who has authority. So he recognizes Jesus' authority.
And
pretty
he
neat.
says his faith is greater than that of anybody
Yeah.
he's met or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So it's like a recognition of Jesus and then an invitation.
Yeah. And then it goes on, I think later, like you said, this idea, even Jesus calming the storm. And, they marvel at that. He's just displaying his
Who is this
authority over everything.
Well, how about the fact that the disciples say, who is this man? And then the demons say, that's the Son of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even the idea that they marveled at this point. It's like, dude, he's just like healed, raised people from the dead. Like you saw someone who has leprosy and all of a sudden they don't have it anymore and you're still like marveling at stuff.
I think
It's
that's
just
a
crazy.
testament to how they felt about the sea.
Yeah.
That it was that scary and overwhelming and chaotic that he just stood up and said, stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think weather in general. Like they had doctors, not in the same kind of medicine and advancement that we do, but like you could go see someone about your body and they might help you in some way. And Jesus shows that he's actually better than any doctor you can go see because he can do that. But then when he can control the weather,
Yeah.
that's a completely different category. It's like he doesn't just have an ability to affect my body, but he can affect everything about this place.
Yeah.
And then I think what's interesting is they marveled at that, but the last thing we see is forgiveness.
Yeah.
That he can even forgive.
All right, 9. I think the for me this thing that struck me in this is that whole when Jesus calls Matthew when we were what was it where I didn't know that Matthew was a tax collector, that he like I didn't what gospel was it we were reading? I don't know.
Maybe
it was
I don't know.
maybe Mark. And we're talking about podcasts. I'm like, oh yeah, it's cool. Like they're like, that's Matthew. So I was like, wait, what? I didn't know that. So
It is amazing.
me. Yeah.
But I mean, it was, okay, so you're surprised. They were shocked.
Yeah.
How could Jesus be calling this guy to be one of his disciples?
Yeah.
Because he was an enemy of the Israelites. I mean, he was a traitor, basically. And that's who Jesus said, come follow me.
Yeah.
And he also had a zealot, Simon the Zealot. So these guys they would hate each other. The zealot wants to overthrow Rome with physical force and, militia warfare. And Matthew went to work for the Romans and profited off of his Jewish brethren. So those two men are polar opposites, and Jesus has called both of them into his inner fold.
Yeah. I just think for me too, this I like what he says here in what is this? We're in 9:12. But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And I just think of like how many people I know, even me in my own story, this time where you feel unworthy because of, for whatever reason. It's like before you can come to Christ, you got to have your crap or your stuff together. And it's just like, no, that's not really the case. And here's a perfect example of that. And so, I don't know. I think that
Absolutely.
speaks to a lot of people that he didn't necessarily come for the people who didn't need him, and everybody needs him. And
Right.
we sometimes miss that. It's like, I gotta have all my stuff together before I can maybe accept an invitation to show up to a small group or to a church service or even fully receive the gift that he's given. It's like, how could he forgive me or something? So, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
a great picture here.
It is. It's beautiful. And I think it is hard to believe sometimes. Like for each of us individually, are we really invited in just as we are?
Yeah.
Are we allowed to come to Jesus right now? Does the Father really want us to come to him with our request as we are? Is he a good father? I mean, it's always hard for us to understand. And I think like another thing that, we see in the Gospels is we see Jesus doing it. So to believe that really is who Jesus is, and this is who Jesus is. And then really the next chapter, when he says he starts inviting people to follow him, and then he gives them the same authority, and he invites them, which is us, into the same life, into the same invitation to other people.
Yeah.
So do we believe it about ourselves, and then do we invite others who are broken and who are marginalized to come into his family, just as they are?
Anything else in 9 before we hop to 10 that's you guys feel like worth mentioning? I know the end of 9 is something that's a part of like the verse that Bruce has been sharing for the Hope Initiative. So reading that again was kind of like, oh yeah, like, just as Jesus went on, his idea of recognizing and praying for workers to come. It wasn't just that he did it and fixed it all, but this idea of praying for other people to come along and partner. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he had compassion,
Yeah.
and so called disciples to go minister on his behalf. I mean, it's really a beautiful picture of what we're called to. I think just sort of recognize, people are being healed. There are blind men who can see. The mute can speak. And then he invites people into his mission. But that's sort of the heart of his mission, which he will talk about at the end of this chapter.
All right, so 10. We're gonna skip
Lance,
what? Were you about to say something?
No,
Lance is not used to jumping in anymore.
Yeah.
That's all good. I'm here hanging out.
Yeah.
I'm easing back in.
Yeah, I was saying you're easing back in. He just got back the other day. He's still thinking about Yosemite. He's like, God's majesty.
The lobster I ate in Maine.
Oh, dang.
Lobster.
Wait, a lobster roll or like actual lobster?
Both.
Oh, yeah. He's full on lobster. It's still digesting. Okay, 10. I'm trying to think of what I had in here. Yeah. I don't know what I want to say about this. I don't know.
I mean, we could start with the heading over verse 16, that section.
Okay.
What does it say?
Persecution will come.
Persecution will come. That's not something we want to hear.
Yeah.
We want to hear like, oh, we experience grace or healing from the Lord, and then like it's all up and to the right from there. But he's laying out for his closest followers like, no, you're going to follow me. You're going to live in this upside down kingdom. It's not going to be easy. Just like it's not easy to control the motivations of your heart. It's not easy to live in this world when this world is opposed to you. The people that you live near or work with don't believe what we believe. And so, persecution will come.
Yeah, it's. I think even a little bit before that, this idea though that it's going to be. It's not always going to happen that you're going to go to towns where you're going to be run out, where they're not going to get it, and so it's like it's not always. It's not always going to seem like it's working, but I guess we got to remember too, it's not up to us. It's all part of a bigger plan, and we just got to be faithful to the call.
Yeah. and to expect it to, I mean, I think, which is what y'all are saying, but I mean, he tells us so much. And then he not only tells us this is what it's going to look like, this is what the kingdom looks like, this is what you should expect. But then, like we said with the Beatitudes, he embodies that, right? We will see him be persecuted. We will see him be, maligned and lied about. I mean, I think we skipped it, but the Pharisees say, this guy is healing demons by the prince of demons, by the devil.
Yep.
I mean, that's the worst thing you could possibly say. I mean, they're saying, this isn't God, this is the devil, is really what they're saying. But everything that Jesus calls us to, he in fact does before us and for us. And so when we step into those places, even though it's not good and it's not easy, we know that Jesus has been there and that he's with us in that.
And I think the end of or 32 there. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. And so it's just, again, this call to like, dude, he calls that we're sent people who are called to proclaim the gospel. There's going to be times, or we can't deny those moments, because it makes it sound pretty harsh. They're like, that's not good. So I don't know.
No, I think we should take Jesus at his word. We should take him at his word when he says that no matter who we are, we're invited into his kingdom, and that the Father wants us to come to him and wants to give us good gifts. We should also take him at his word when he says this is a real decision and it's a real life that you have faith in, that you're following me in.
Yeah.
It's not an American just way of life.
Yeah, this was last week, chapter 5, but the way he speaks sometimes it seems extreme, and he's using hyperbole for sure. But I think you need to take him at his word. So he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. Like, he's being serious.
Yeah.
Should you gouge your eye out? I mean, hopefully not, but you do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And that's what he's saying.
And then right after that, which is kind of, you said persecution will come, this whole like chunk here, not peace, but a sword. Mm-hmm. That section, I was like, oh man, I had to read that a couple times, because again, it's a pretty provocative.
It's about to happen for them too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a little hard for us to understand in our culture, but he's the fulfillment, and he's not fulfilling it in any way people expected. And so they're about to kill him for it, torture him and kill him for it. And then they're going to do the same thing to his disciples. So he knows what's coming, and he's warning them.
Well, it's just interesting, because even there he said, don't think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. And you think like, oh, the Christus, or the Prince of Peace, and it's all, but he's coming to bring a sword. The sword, I'm assuming, is like his judgment, which ultimately his judgment is perfect. So yeah, that's going to bring peace after it. So, but that initial idea of like, wait, he's not come to bring peace. And maybe they're thinking, oh yeah, not peace for everybody else because he's our guy, and so we're on the inside, but they just don't get it yet. But
I think that's exactly right. I think that they just don't understand yet.
But the
He's the lion
swords are
and
coming,
the lamb.
ladies and
That's
gentlemen. Right?
I think there's he says, whoever, receives you receives me, whoever receives me receives him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's again this participatory nature of what we have in Christ. I mean, he says, if you've seen the Father, you've seen me. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you're in me, you're with the Father. I mean, it's this relationship that is so intimate with the Father that we're actually invited into. And you just see that in different ways over and over. It's the calling, it's prayer, it's just reception, it's security in all ways.
Yeah. So is it okay if we move on to 11? And then there's kind of this shift to John the Baptist stuff here, which I don't know, I kind of feel like, wait, I thought we were kind of done with John the Baptist, at least from the other guy. I don't remember him getting brought back up again. So maybe, again, because of the audience, the Hebrews, like, he's talking to the
Well, he connects them to Elijah, which they're gonna know that hyperlink, and so that's Old Testament stuff.
Yeah.
I do think the structure, like I think you're saying, is different structure than the other gospel, and I think it's purposeful for Matthew. He said, "This is the king. This is he has these 5 sections of teaching that he's going to bring out. We just finished the first one. So this is what he's saying the law really is. This is the new teaching. Then he's going to show you that he has authority to be the king. And then John is going to ask him right now, are you?
Yeah.
Are you the Messiah?
Yeah.
So he's shown us, he's taught, and then John says, but are you?
Yeah.
It's interesting. So they go on behalf of John the Baptist and ask, are you the one? And he gives them a message to go back. And so in 11, Jesus answered them, verse 4, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. He's quoting from Isaiah and pieces of Ezekiel, and I forget which other prophet. But he's like pulling together these Old Testament sayings they would all know. And in each of those, or at least in a couple of them, it also says, and the prisoner is set free. But John's in prison. And so Jesus is, I think, like kind of speaking in code is like,
Comfort, too.
yeah, all these things are happening, yes, but you're still going to suffer. And you don't know that if you don't know the connection to what he's saying in the Old Testament, but it's staggering to see, like, there's all this hope, but that doesn't mean you won't suffer in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, if I just want to encourage people as you're studying, if you have time, I know this feels like a lot, but if you can go back and look at those hyperlinks, they should be in your Bible. There should be like a little letter, and you can see where he's quoting. I just went back and read, Isaiah 35 this morning, and I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's written to, which this is a sort of a retelling of the exile story in the Old Testament with Moses, but it's a new way. It's a new covenant. It's the true king. And we've seen that all throughout Matthew. And Isaiah 35 is written to the people who are in exile to comfort them. And it says, your God is going to come back and save you.
Yeah.
And this is how you'll know. The blind will see. The lame will walk. The mute will speak. I mean, Jesus is saying, hey, the exile is over. And he's also saying, hey, God is saving. That's who I am. I mean, it's really, he's saying a lot that we can miss, but it's so beautiful.
I think for me, just to wrap up at the end of 11, it was a refresher, this idea of even, everything that we've read up to this point, just through this week, it felt heavy. It felt like, oh my gosh, there's a lot that was just dense. And this kind of promise of like peace and rest that we can find in Christ is kind of like, oh, like take a breath. It's okay. You just, at least for me, like you just read all this stuff and, it can seem overwhelming or unattainable or just like, I don't even get it. And so, I don't know, I thought that whole 25 through, 30, it's good. It's encouraging. So,
yeah, I mean, I think, again, a large part of what he's doing is saying this really is the Messiah. He has the authority, and you have to make a decision on if you believe that or not. That's what he's apologizing for. That's what he's telling us. But the mission is mercy, right? That's the message of the gospel, is mercy and compassion and forgiveness and relationship, right relationship with God and each other again. And that's what he invites us into, and that's where we find rest. That's where we find wholeness and completion, is following him at his feet.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, or we wrap up on that? She keeps like trying to eye you down, like, Lance, you gotta say something.
Well, you were talking about how much that meant to you.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
Wait, which part? I'm like what you just said.
Well,
the last few verses
Yes.
of 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was telling Rachel, you were getting all the stuff set up for the recording, and Rachel and I were over there talking. I'm just back at work this week, and we record these in advance, and so I hadn't read all this, and then I got asked, can you do this on Thursday? Sure, yeah, that's fine. So rather than read this daily like I would normally, I just powered through it 3 different times over the last 2 days, and set aside things for some reason, like, sure, I feel like I'm learning a lot. I like knowing things about the hyperlinks and all that, but something about that experience the last couple of days helped me experience Jesus, not just know things about him or know the claim he's making or who he is as the Messiah, but experience him. So, like, I made notes in succession, he heals a leper, the centurion's servant, Peter's mother-in-law, and then if you keep reading, and many more that night, a demon-possessed man, a paralytic, a bleeding woman, a dead girl, 2 blind men, a mute man, and then he sends his apostles out to do the same thing. And he is healing. And I mean, I need to experience Jesus that way. Or we talked about highs and lows my summer. I got some hard to hear news about my own health and the chronic pain I've lived with for the last couple of years. And like reading Jesus meet people where they are, I needed to read about him that way. I needed to know him that way. And it all ends with, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your soul. So,
Yeah.
again, this morning, a friend of mine was texting me. His wife has had a chronic illness for 12 years. He's been asking God to heal my wife. And it's like the words of Jesus, come to me. I'm gentle, I'm lowly in heart. You'll find rest for your souls. So I think many of us are living with things that are really challenging, and we think because of the world we live in, we're supposed to be comfortable, everything's supposed to be easy, it's all supposed to be right. And the challenging words of Jesus meet us there, and then he comforts us and says, the only place you can find real rest is in me.